Hi guys, Marvelous Joe at the top of the episode to let you know that next week's episode, coming out January 19th, 2021, will mark the 5th anniversary of this podcast.
It's a huge milestone for us. We've been doing the show since 2016, right before our 30th birthday. And this year, we're turning 35, so we are unlocking a few achievements here, as it were.
We want you guys to celebrate with us by featuring you on the show. If you visit dynamicduel.com, you'll see a red microphone button on the bottom right of the screen. Click the button, and you'll be prompted to leave us a voicemail message that we will include in our next episode.
Yeah, you could leave us a message saying, congrats on 5 years, or happy 35th birthday, or anything you want. Asterisk, within reason, for 20 seconds.
We can't wait to hear from you, the fans, and have you as part of this milestone episode. Again, just visit dynamicduel.com and click the red microphone button on the bottom right to leave us a voicemail. And it does let you review your message before sending if you were curious. And don't forget to let us know who you are.
Can't wait for this. On with the show. Hi, and welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we are going to do a throwback review to the 2002 film Spider-Man, starring Tobey Maguire, directed by Sam Raimi. I'm surprised we haven't reviewed this film before. It is a big milestone in terms of superhero cinema, I feel.
Absolutely. Well, we counted down the best of the 2000 to 2009 decade in our Brothers Awards from last episode, so I was kind of feeling a little bit nostalgic. Wanted to dive into this hugely influential superhero film from my teenage years. And to join with us in the nostalgia, we'll be joined by a guest to help us review the film, Max from the Ready to Retro podcast. We're huge fans of the show, and Max is a great guy, and we can't wait for him to join us. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Before we review Spider-Man, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, including Walter Hamada's extension as the DC Films president through 2023. We also got our first look at the animated film Justice Society World War II, and Joseph's going to talk a little bit about Marvel Legends, which debuted on Disney Plus this past week. As always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic.
Remember that this podcast now has a card game out called Dynamic Duel War, and you can get it by joining us on Patreon. Join any one of our tiers, which start at $2 a month, and you'll see the details on how to get the game. If you want to have fun simulating battles between Marvel and DC characters, check us out at patreon.com/dynamicduel, and check out the link to get more information about the game in our show notes.
Just a quick reminder, guys, to please subscribe to our show if you haven't already, and if you have, please help us grow our podcast audience by leaving a quick rating or review on whatever platform you're listening to us on, or by sharing us with your fellow DC and Marvel fans.
We want to give a huge thanks to the guy who loves this podcast, who reviewed us from Ireland. Thank you very much for the kind words, and we love your screen name. But with that out of the way,
quick to the no prize.
A no prize is an award Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award we post on social media that we personally draw for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week.
Last week's question, tying into the new year of 2021, was what Marvel or DC live-action film are you looking forward to the most this year? We got quite a few answers, but let's go through the honorable mentions before naming the no prize winner.
Honorable mention goes to CJ Kraft, who said that he is for sure looking forward to the Shang-Chi movie.
Nice pronunciation.
I'm still trying to get in the hang of not pronouncing it Shang-Chi. But CJ said that he can't wait to see what styles Shang-Chi uses in the film, and he's hoping for some very realistic fight scenes like the Daredevil Netflix show, mixed with a bit of Jackie Chan environmental combat. But really, he just wants to see some good kung fu. And so do I. I'm really hoping that the fighting in that movie ranks among the best kung fu movies ever made.
At the very least, like the best fight choreography of any superhero film.
Absolutely. Yes, it has to. It has to.
Our next honorable mention goes to Bruce Flansburgh, who said that he's looking forward to any of them, all of them. He wants all of the comic book movies. And really, he says he just wants good movies in his life again, because 2020 took that from everyone.
And we won't soon forget that. Yeah, at this point, I really will just take anything. Like even the Marvel Legends show, which I'll get into later, which was essentially just a couple of trailers for the characters. I still ate that shit up because I was so starving for the content. Our next honorable mention goes to Mike Luther from the Nerds United podcast, who said that he's looking forward to the Eternals because he knows nothing about them, but he loves the casting.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't know anything about them, but that cast definitely has me excited for that film. That's like the only reason I'm excited for it.
What do you mean you don't know anything about them? We've talked about them a few times in this show.
And even then, like, there's still a mystery to me, all these different characters. And I don't know how it's going to tie into the larger MCU. It's coming out this year, and we still don't have a trailer or a poster or anything for it.
Well, we'll probably get our first trailer with the Black Widow movie that comes out in a few months.
Or Morbius.
Yeah, maybe.
Before we announce the winners of this week's No Prize, we want to give a quick shout out to everyone who took the time to send us an answer, including...
Yeah, I do have to say real quick, though, that I have to apologize to everybody who answered on the Facebook post that Jonathan made, because I forgot to mention you guys in our last episode. It's just been so long since Jonathan actually posted the question to Facebook that I forgot to check there, you know? So gosh. I'm still going to blame him for this one.
No, this is on you. I'm not taking that blame.
Yeah, my bad. But big thanks this week to Joel Seagrave, Harrison Fox, John Speas, Paige Barger, Richard McGrew, Mike Myers, love your movies, Rachel Bernatowicz, Nightwing Superman, Katie Caldwell, Isaiah Bethune, Shane Habazine, and John Starosky. Thanks, guys, so much for taking the time to interact with our show.
But the winners of this week's No Prize are Miggy Medangian and Chris Castaneda. Miggy gave the answer that he was hyped for the Suicide Squad because of the cast, the level of production, and the apparent faithfulness to the source material. It's a movie full of obscure DC villains played by great actors, and from the looks of the trailer, they spared no expense in terms of the action and visual effects. Most importantly to Miggy, it seems very comic accurate from the personalities, to the costumes of the characters, to the premise and function of the team. It just looks like it's going to be a whole lot of fun, damn it!
Yeah, damn it!
I can't wait for that one either. It looks like it's just going to be massive. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a trailer from it and just getting more information about the plot in general. I've heard everything from Starro to the Spear of Destiny will be in the film. I just don't know what to expect in terms of the scope.
Yeah, and considering it's going to be rated R, I just feel like James Gunn is going to bring it.
Yeah.
I'm giving the No Prize to Chris Castaneda, who said that he's most looking forward to the untitled Spider-Man 3 film, primarily considering that Tobey Maguire is returning, because his Spider-Man meant so much to him as a kid. He remembers the day that he first saw the film in theaters with his dad, and the day that he brought home the VHS tape with his saved allowance, and how he would watch the tape every day for weeks after school. And I chose that answer because I felt like it tied in nicely with the themes that we're going to be discussing later in our review, and remembering how influential the first Spider-Man film was to us as young children or teenagers, or even older than that. The movie wasn't just important to superhero cinema, but important to a lot of our memories.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll go into this later on in the episode, but the Spider-Man movie hit me with a much higher factor of nostalgia than I was expecting. So I totally relate to Chris's answer.
Definitely. So congrats again to Miggy Medangian and Chris Castaneda for winning this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. And now that that's done,
on to the news. Okay, so Variety broke the news last week that Walter Hamada, the president of DC Films, has signed a multi-year extension through 2023 to remain the president, overseeing the DC film slate on HBO Max and in theaters. Now, he first joined DC Films back in 2018. He took over for Jeff Johns and John Berg, who had overseen films prior to that. So he started off with Aquaman and moved on to Shazam. He came from a horror background, and for those two films specifically, he brought some of his horror directors that he had worked with previously, including James Wan and David F. Sandberg. And those two films specifically are some of my favorite DC films. I think they're actually the two best films that DC has made, along with The Joker, which he also oversaw. So news of his extension as the DC Films president was really exciting to me. And yeah, there have been like a few balls dropped probably with Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 1984, but I think for the most part, he's the Kevin Feige of DC Films, and it's really good to have someone in that role.
Now, he doesn't seem to be as big of a fan of the comic books as Kevin Feige is, but he does seem to have really good business acumen.
Yeah, he's not as hands-on with the filmmaking either as Kevin Feige is. Kevin Feige's a producer. Hamada is more of an executive producer, I would say. And the fact that he wants to bring so much more DC content to the masses, it just shows his passion for getting these stories out to everyone.
You know who isn't a big fan of this news?
Oh, Ray Fisher? Yeah, the whole Ray Fisher kind of ordeal, I think, is pretty much coming to a close with this announcement.
Yeah, and it's been going on for a while. I respect definitely what Ray Fisher is trying to do if the allegations are as bad as he's implying. I'm actually really disappointed about the news that he won't be returning for the Flash movie because I was a big fan of his Victor Stone cyborg performance. But it's hard to know exactly what to make of everything when no details about what happened with Joss Whedon and Jeff Johns and John Berg have come out, you know? If the allegations are that serious, then this is huge, and Ray Fisher is being quite the martyr for this important cause. But if it turns out that the allegations weren't quite as severe, then it makes Ray Fisher kind of look like he's throwing a tantrum over something's not going his way. I'm inclined to believe the former, but mostly I just want to really know what happened behind the scenes with Joss Whedon's reshoots of Justice League. We do know some of the ramifications in that Joss Whedon was removed from Warner Media.
I mean, that's what Ray Fisher says.
It does seem like Jason Momoa has his back, though.
Yeah, and I'm not saying nothing went down. Warner Media did hire a third-party federal judge, I think a retired federal judge, to oversee the investigation. And, you know, they said that nothing was too actionable based on the results of that investigation, and some action has been taken. And so they, you know, said to Variety that, you know, it's just time to move on. I think Ray Fisher kind of shot himself in the foot when he said that he would not take part in any film that Walter Hamada was a part of, because he said that after the New York Times expose, kind of praising Hamada, and considering the success record he's had with DC films, I don't think Warner Brothers was ever going to choose Ray Fisher over Hamada.
Right.
Like, Ray Fisher isn't entitled to the role of Cyborg. And I think it was kind of foolish on his part. I think he was probably just getting some bad advice from some people to throw himself under the bus and bite the hand that feeds him.
Yeah, considering that he wouldn't be working with Joss Whedon or Jeff Johns or John Berg on the upcoming Flashpoint movie, I think it would have been in his best interest career-wise to accept the ramifications of the investigation as they were and then continue to try to solicit change from within the industry as he was continuing to work in it.
And the weird thing is that he kind of did. Like, the pinned tweet on his Twitter account says that the investigation was complete and he was happy with it. And then for some reason, once the New York Times interview with Hamada came out, he decided to open his mouth again. And, you know, if you're saying that you're not going to work with Hamada again on a film that Hamada is knowingly going to produce, you're kind of, you know, resigning yourself from that role.
Yeah, it's too bad, because again, I was a big fan of Ray Fisher's work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the full performance in the upcoming Zack Snyder's Justice League HBO Max series.
Yeah, I think Ray Fisher is a great actor, and I think he was, you know, just getting started in the industry. And, you know, based on his actions here, I'm not sure who's going to hire him after this. Yeah, I think he deserves more roles, but we'll see. Hollywood is very much a industry based on loyalty, especially at Warner Brothers, which itself could be kind of dangerous, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast. Moving on to other DC news, I think it was The Hollywood Reporter that gave us our first look this past week at the upcoming animated DC film Justice Society World War II.
I had no idea this was a project.
Yeah, me neither. It looks like it's going to be starring Wonder Woman, which kind of kills me, because how cool would that have been to have the actual live-action Wonder Woman set during World War II, like the whole WW2 thing, with cameos from the Justice Society.
That would have been a better sequel than Wonder Woman 1984, for sure.
It would have been amazing. I'm always continuously, like, impressed and surprised by the moves that DC Animation makes. I wish more people watched those films.
Yeah, because they're telling really great stories.
For sure. And this one looks pretty interesting. They recently retconned Wonder Woman's history in DC Rebirth so that she was like the very first superhero to emerge on the scene, like before Superman even. And she was a founding member of the Justice Society alongside Green Lantern and the Flash, the Golden Age versions of those characters. And it looks like they're taking this same approach here in this film, although it looks like Green Lantern won't be a member of it. The still image we got is pretty cool. I think it's going to be the same animation style as Superman Man of Tomorrow. It's just very, very clean. But in that image, you know, we see Wonder Woman in like a Golden Age type outfit with a sword and shield. We also see the Flash, Hawkman, Hourman, and Black Canary. But according to the article, we're also going to be seeing Steve Trevor, Iris West for some reason. I'm not honestly sure why she's in the movie.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah.
Dr. Fate, and interestingly enough, Aquaman.
Huh, that's strange. It sounds like this will be the start of a new reboot to a new animated DC continuity.
Well, no, I think that was, you know, Superman Man of Tomorrow. But I do think that, you know, this obviously will come first chronologically. I'm still not sure where Batman Soul of the Dragon is going to fit in, if that's in this new universe or not. Because that'll be kind of like a cool origin story to Batman.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something I didn't think of, considering that Man of Tomorrow was a Superman origin film, and it appears this Justice Society film will be a new Wonder Woman origin.
Yeah, it's kind of cool how they're tying all these other DC characters in with the origins of the Trinity. Like you have Martian Manhunter for Superman, you have the Justice Society for Wonder Woman, and you have Lady Shiva, Bronze Tiger, and Richard Dragon, and all the other Kung Fu characters for Batman.
I kind of like what DC Animation is building here. It's like they're all getting their own unique franchises before joining together, hopefully in another animated Justice League franchise.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one. The cast for all of these characters was also announced, but of note, Matt Bomer, who plays Negative Man on the Doom Patrol live-action show for HBO Max, is going to be playing The Flash, and Stana Katic is going to voice Wonder Woman. Both of those characters voiced Superman and Lois Lane, respectively, in the Superman Unbound animated film that came out a while back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they look like Superman and Lois Lane. Like, they could totally play those characters in live action if they wanted to.
Do we know when Justice Society World War II is going to come out?
No, I think it's coming out this year, but we don't have a hard and fast release date. I'm guessing probably by the fall, if not sooner, maybe summer. Whenever they announce these animated projects, they tend to move pretty quickly.
Yeah, DC Animation typically tends to release about 4 animated movies each year, and we're already getting our first one in a few weeks with Batman Soul of the Dragon. So I'd be surprised if we don't see this before the end of summer. Between this movie and the upcoming Black Adam movie, it seems like the JSA are really coming into their own, huh?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I wouldn't be surprised if they made this movie specifically as a way to introduce the characters to audiences, before Black Adam. The DC Animation tends to be a good springboard in that way. I've always been like a bigger fan of the Justice League, but the Justice Society is growing on me more and more. Those characters are just really cool. And if you haven't listened to our JSA versus Fantastic Four duel episode, definitely check that out, because that was a lot of fun. The JSA is just a great team, and it's super exciting that they'll be making their feature film debut with this movie. And that brings us to our question of the week. What is your favorite superhero team that is yet to make a feature film debut?
And we're not referring to television series, we're referring to either live action or animated full-length feature films. Post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to social media. Be sure to answer before January 17th. Moving on to Marvel news, we finally got some cool MCU content on the Disney Plus platform. Now, granted, it's rehashed footage, but it does provide an interesting recap on the characters featured within the show's episodes. Now, Marvel Legends so far has 2 episodes, one about Wanda Maximoff the Scarlet Witch, and another about Vision. Basically, they're about 6 to 7 minute episodes that kind of montage the character's journey from their first appearance within the MCU up to their current state at the end of events of Avengers Endgame. These montages are really well made in the way that really good trailers are edited together, and it definitely gets me hyped for the upcoming WandaVision show that's going to debut this week, this Friday, January 15th, in a 2-part opener. Each episode is going to be 30 minutes long. So it's kind of like 1 hour long episode, but they're breaking it up into 2 parts.
Now, I haven't seen the Marvel Legends episodes yet, but for someone who hasn't seen any of the MCU films, do you recommend that they watch these, or should this only be viewed by someone who has seen all of the films?
That's a good question. I would absolutely recommend them to people who have no knowledge of the MCU, because even though you're lacking a lot of context within the edits, you get a good enough idea of who the character is and what they've been through. It's a long enough montage that you actually connect a bit with the character involved. Not as much as you would if you saw the entire films,
right?
But, it's a start. Regardless if you're a fan who absolutely loves the MCU films or you're someone that's new to Marvel in general, I would recommend watching these shorts because they're easily digestible at just 6 to 7 minutes long each. They're informative if you're not knowledgeable about the movies, and they're fun to watch if you're fans of the movies. So either way, it's a good time.
I guess just go into it knowing that you're going to get spoilers for the films you haven't seen prior. So if these trailers do get you excited for the characters, for the films, you won't actually be surprised when you do watch the movies.
That's true. Like, you'll already know watching Infinity War what happens with Vision and that Thanos gets the Mind Stone and everything like that. So in that regard, spoiler alert. But I think if you're one of the people that haven't already seen any of the MCU films, by this point, you probably don't care if you get spoiled on the previous ones. I actually think that the WandaVision television show is going to convert a lot of people who haven't seen any of the movies into the MCU.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, we'll see how accessible the show is to people who have no knowledge of the characters. But I guess that's what Marvel Legends is for.
Exactly. Now, I don't think they're going to release any more episodes until probably the next Disney Plus show comes out, which is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and that's going to come out in March. So we probably won't get any more Marvel Legends episodes until then, unless Marvel Legends decides to pull out episodes involving characters like Quicksilver or anybody else that may be featured in the WandaVision series.
It would also be cool to put out shows for like Iron Man and Captain America, characters that really may not have much, if any, of a future in the MCU films going forward.
Yeah, that's totally true. I'd love to see that too. But I think that does it for all the news for this episode. So let's go ahead and get into our main event where we review the 2002 film Spider-Man. Let's go ahead and get our buddy Max from the Ready to Retro podcast on the line, because I'm ready to retro. All right, Spider-Man, starring Tobey Maguire and directed by Sam Raimi, came out in 2002, right as Jonathan and I were at the wee age of 16 years old. It's a movie that holds a very special place in my heart, as it came out during a very formative time in my life. When I was just starting to drive, I just got a job, was starting to get noticed by the ladies, and the world was my proverbial oyster. I think a lot of people in our age group remember this film as kind of the quintessential movie event in the early part of the new millennium. And we have one such millennial joining us for this review. Please welcome a new guest of ours, Max from the Ready to Retro podcast.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm super excited to be on today, and I'm super excited to talk about Spider-Man.
Yeah, we are so excited to have you because we're big fans of the show. For those who may not know, Max, tell us a little bit about yourself and your awesome podcast.
Yeah, so basically we are a podcast that just looks at the good times of the 80s and 90s. So we look at the movies, the TV shows, the music, the toys, video games, everything that's nostalgic during that time. It's myself, my cousin Chris, and our friend Chelsea. We just talk a lot about, Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, Batman the Animated Series, things like that. There's horror talks. We're all over the place. And what's super cool is we get to have awesome people and guests, and we've met so many people through this medium, and we actually had Marvelous Joe on early on in our podcast. We talked The Matrix, so be sure to check that out. That's episode 10. But yeah, that's basically Ready to Retro in a nutshell.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun recording that with you guys. And you and Chris and Chelsea, I think, all have really great chemistry. It's obvious that you guys have been friends for a long time. And I really like the way that you handle guests on your show. I think you're super hospitable and accommodating.
Well, I'll reveal a little bit behind the mic. So when Joe came on, it was still early on, and we had some really bad audio things. We're still figuring things out, and I was like, oh, this is so embarrassing. So it took about like 30 to 40 minutes, and Joe goes, yeah, this is why we don't have guests. And I'm like, oh, crap, this is a bad first impression. This is terrible. So I'm a little surprised, to be honest, that I got to be asked to be on your show. So I guess we're doing our job.
No, yeah, you guys definitely are. I love your episodes.
Yeah, you guys do a great job. That Matrix episode was a lot of fun. I really liked that one.
Appreciate that.
Big question that we ask all of our guests.
Yes.
Do you prefer Marvel or DC?
Marvel 100 out of 100 times.
Hell yeah.
One of these days, we're going to get a DC fan, because everyone so far, I think, has chosen Marvel.
No, not Jay.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
And that's before the MCU. A little history is, growing up in the early 90s. I was born in 1990. So X-Men, the animated series, Spider-Man, the animated series. Yes, I watched Batman, but those three things, like throughout my life, those are the three stories that I've gravitated towards, even reading comics and stuff. And I definitely contribute that to those TV shows. But yeah, Spider-Man, I love Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think those cartoons were a big reason why X-Men and Spider-Man were some of the earliest Marvel comic book movies we got, starting from the year 2000.
Absolutely.
Now, in regards to Spider-Man, how old were you when this movie was released? You said you were born in 1990, so I guess 12, right?
I was 12, yeah. I was 12.
Yeah.
It was like right after my 12th birthday.
Tell us about your first time seeing this film.
Yeah, I vividly remember seeing the second one in the theaters because my buddy and I were cracking up during the scene where, Spider-Man's being crowd lifted. I don't know. We just thought it was hilarious. There was people crying around, and we were just cracking up. We thought it was funny being 13. So I'm trying to think. I know I've seen this movie so many times during that time, and being 12, you're kind of in that transition of like toys. Are they cool or are they not? So I remember having like a few action figures, and I just remember like the toys were heavy for this movie. The video game, I had the video game. I still have the video game for PS2. I just remember like all that. It was a big deal when this movie came out.
Yeah, Spider-Man Mania really took over around that time that we were in our early teen years. Jonathan, do you remember the first time seeing this movie?
Oh yeah, just watching it for the first time in a long time yesterday. Again, I totally like had a wave of nostalgia just being back in the theater and seeing it for the first time and experiencing all the different moments and the different scenes for the first time, just being blown away by it. I definitely remember it.
Yeah, this movie came out when we were at our most active at our local comic book shop. We were buying and reading a ton of issues at that time because, I mean, what else is a teen going to spend their hard-earned cash on, right? But we were consistently dropping by Free Time Comics, and one day they had a sign-up saying that they were selling advance tickets to a special midnight screening of the upcoming Spider-Man movie. And I was like, wait, I get to see the movie Thursday night, hours before anyone else? Because,
Right.
you know, midnight shows weren't really a thing yet by that point.
I miss those a lot.
Yeah, me too.
I miss those, so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an event, and that's just not a thing anymore.
And it was
Definitely.
only like the true diehard fans that were there too, which just made the experience so much better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was like, shut up and take my money. And so I bought tickets, and we got to the theater a few weeks later, and I was wearing my Spider-Man shirt, and Jonathan was wearing his Superman t-shirt in protest. And all these other comic shop patrons were lined up, and the excitement in the air was like electric when we took our seats. And I remember the previews came on, and we got to see that teaser trailer for the 2003 Hulk movie with Eric Bana where his eyes turn green while looking in
Right.
the mirror.
Right.
That came on, and like everybody was roaring like we were charging into battle. We just went fucking crazy. Everybody was yelling, but then they all shut the hell up when those first violin notes started playing from Danny Elfman's score. It was just a hush that went over the theater, and we saw the new Marvel logo and that amazing opening credits animation, and it just went from there. It was a great time to be alive for sure.
Typically, bigger movies don't have opening credits anymore. But this really made me appreciate what you could do with the opening credits. The opening credits for this film, with the score, with the animated visuals. It was so cool, and it totally set the mood, I think, for the film.
Yeah, considering we don't see Spider-Man in costume until about halfway through the movie, it was a great way to get a taste of what was to come with his costume and the Green Goblin mask and going through the city and stuff.
Yeah, you're making a good point because now I think like Endgame, it just goes straight into the story, right? And
Yeah.
that whole thing about the credits is to get the vibe and the feel. You know, it's so funny because when I was watching this, and like you, Johnny, it's been a while since I've seen this movie. So it was a little bit more nostalgic, but I was just thinking about, man, like that Danny Elfman score. I was waiting for Batman. I don't know, just when I was watching it this time, it was very apparent it was Danny Elfman. As a kid, you know, it totally went over my head, but I'm just like, you know, when's Bruce Wayne going to be in this movie?
Yeah, he definitely has his own like signature style. I don't know what it is, but yeah, you're right. His scores sound like Danny Elfman, and I love all of them. I have yet to find a Danny Elfman score that I don't like.
Yeah, it's like a nice, dark, kind of gothic vibe, and that's why it suits Tim Burton so well, his music. But it also suits Sam Raimi, because Sam Raimi himself is a fairly dark, I don't want to say Burton-esque, because I don't want to compare the two, but he does bring a lot of like similar dark vibes to his films, like in Darkman and Evil Dead, you know, obviously, that's a horror film. So I'm a big fan of those two directors for sure, and understand why Danny Elfman works so well with them.
Like Danny Elfman, Sam Raimi definitely has his own signature style. I think it all kind of comes from his horror background. It's almost comedic, which I think lends itself very well to Spider-Man.
Absolutely. And Sam Raimi, at the time, people were like, what? You know, because he was known for Evil Dead, and Evil Dead was a very well-known franchise. You had the first one that was a low-budget student film, and then Evil Dead 2, which is just a classic in the horror genre. And then you have Army of Darkness, which is just comedic, action, Bruce Campbell, amazing. And then he's the one to take on Spider-Man. But, you know, looking at it, he knocked it out of the park. And apparently the reason why he got the job over other directors is because he has a collection of like 25,000 comics. And I wonder if like what the pitch was on that. Like, was Sam Raimi sitting down with Sony and they're like, so we're looking at a director. What qualifies you? Because we see a lot of horror. He's like, yeah. Did I mention I have 25,000 comics? They're like, sold. He must know a lot about comics. He has a bunch of them. So
That's awesome.
Yeah. So apparently he was like a huge comic book reader.
Yeah, I remember the story about how he had a big like print of, I think it was John Romita's artwork up on his wall as a kid of Spider-Man. So he always grew up a big fan of the character and Doctor Strange. So I'm really interested in seeing his Doctor Strange movie that's going to come out in a few years.
That's right. He's directing that.
Pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Now, when I left the theater after seeing this for the first time, I was happy as a clam, and I was just absolutely thrilled with the movie, even though I recognized that it had some problems. I didn't even care. And when I watched the movie again yesterday for the first time in about 5 or so years, I still recognized those problems and still did not even care. Because when this movie came out, and I still feel this way about it, it was the purest comic-to-screen translation ever. More faithful than the X-Men, certainly more faithful than Blade, and even Batman and Superman. And with how popular this movie was, it felt like we were on the precipice of like a big explosion of comic book movies to hit the screen. And we definitely were, because since this movie has come out, we've just been inundated with amazing comic book movies.
Definitely. I would say there is no MCU without Spider-Man. You know,
Absolutely.
And it was interesting. I was looking at like the list of Marvel movies specifically, and it like started off great. Spider-Man 2 is like still considered one of the greatest comic book movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then Spider-Man 3, that was just it. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. So it ruined not just the Spider-Man franchise, but it just started going downhill. Like Daredevil, you know, there was like Elektra, and then the Fantastic Four movies. You're like, what is going on?
Yeah, Ghost Rider. Yep.
Ghost Rider. And then that's why like Jon Favreau with Iron Man had to make something different. So I don't know. Do we have the MCU without Spider-Man? I would argue no.
I would definitely agree with that. No, we don't have the MCU without Spider-Man for sure.
I think the first Spider-Man definitely set like a standard for superhero films going forward. Absolutely. Especially in terms of origin stories. You know, the X-Men, they didn't really get an origin. Blade really wasn't an origin. But this was just so well done in terms of introducing people to a character that they already loved. And maybe they weren't as familiar with his backstory as comic fans, but I think it did a really good job of explaining how he became Spider-Man. I think that would later be trumped a few years later by Batman Begins. But I think a majority of the comic book films that came out necessarily didn't want to take the same approach as Batman Begins. A lot of them, I think, kind of went the Spider-Man route in terms of their origin storytelling.
Yeah, they definitely used this movie as a template for a lot of origin stories going forward. I think part of the appeal of this film really lies in the purity of its presentation. Like Sam Raimi took a very archetypal approach to the characters and the story. It presents a very standard 3-act monomyth structure. But I think what really set Spider-Man apart and gave it such mainstream appeal beyond just us comic book nerds, and how it really piqued the interest of kids and grandparents and girlfriends alike, is that unlike most other superhero films, Peter Parker's journey, his primary struggle, motivation, and trials, they're mostly centered around his love for Mary Jane. At its core, Spider-Man is a romantic story about a nerdy guy pining for a girl, his struggle to earn her affection. It's really a timeless tale, but with tights and spiderwebs and goblins tossed in. Like, you've heard of romantic comedies, right? Well, I think that this film is a primary example of a romantic action genre film.
Totally. Yeah, and there's a lot of themes that are going on in this movie. And you can see Sam Raimi taking a approach where he wants the character to be relatable. And that's one of the reasons why I love Spider-Man, is because Peter Parker is so relatable. And if you read the comics, it's not about Spider-Man. It's about Peter Parker. You know,
Right.
I can't relate to being an Amazon, obviously. I can't relate to be, royalty like Aquaman or Black Panther. I can't relate to being a billionaire like Bruce Wayne or Tony Stark. I can relate to kind of an outcast, nerdy kid who wants to be seen, has his power, tries to help everybody, but his personal life kind of gets complicated. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
So I think in this movie, Sam Raimi really is the pioneer of what makes a good superhero movie. Is you have to relate to that character, and it's not really a Spider-Man movie. It is a Peter Parker movie. And, you see that with like Tony Stark. The really good ones, I think, do that well. It's interesting because I think, I know I'm biased, but I think Batman has yet to do that. Like, do you really relate to Bruce Wayne? I'm still waiting for like that quintessential Bruce Wayne story. They kind of do that in Rises with his downfall and his back being broken and things like that. So there's glimpses, but I don't think it's yet to be perfected. So maybe this next Batman movie they can do that, but I just think that Sam Raimi puts the foundation for what makes a comic book movie good.
We've talked about this on the podcast before, where like Marvel has very relatable characters and DC has very like aspirational characters.
Yes.
I think one of the reasons like we don't really have a relatable Batman movie yet is because Bruce Wayne is the act and Batman is the real character. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of not surprised that we don't have like a good relatable Bruce Wayne story. But in terms of relatability, I don't think you get more relatable than Spider-Man. I think that he's the flagship character of Marvel for a reason, just because so many people love the character. You're right when you say that this is a Peter Parker film, but even in regards to Spider-Man, his relatability is much more than most characters. You can't see who's behind the mask. You can't see if it's a man or a woman or what race they are. I think everyone can put on the tights and costume of Spider-Man and feel like they are him. You can't do that with most comic book superheroes.
Yeah, I think that was a message that Into the Spider-Verse really hammered home with the introduction of Miles Morales and how at the end he was saying, you could wear the suit. He's such a great character, Spider-Man in general.
Absolutely.
Fucking love him. Now, coupled with the theme of teenage love is the very Spider-Man moral of responsibility. As always, with Peter Parker, we learn that with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that Uncle Ben's lesson was used really well in this movie particularly, not only because we get to see explicitly how his guilt drives him into action, but also because it plays into the romantic drama itself, how this newfound burden ultimately forces him to reject his primary motivation, which is the love of his life, Mary Jane. It's tragic stuff in the way that all the best Spider-Man stories are. Like, his character has always been in part defined by how much he gets put through the emotional ringer alongside those that he cares about. And it's what makes Spidey one of the most enduring popular superheroes of all time, in addition to that relatability.
You say it's a romantic action. I would still throw comedy in there. It's like a romantic comedy action. But I think like if you were to classify this in terms of like classic genre labels, whether it's a tragedy or a comedy, comedies were always stories that weren't necessarily funny but had a good ending, and tragedies were always stories that had a bad ending, like Hamlet or something where everyone dies. I would almost classify this as a tragedy. You mentioned that it was tragic, and it is, because in this film, at least, he doesn't get the girl purposefully.
Yeah, and he sets it up that way. Peter Parker is the narrator, and he kind of says, like, hey, basically, my life sucks. It's complicated. But to go back to that great power comes great responsibility. So I would argue that that's the reason why Spider-Man 3 sucks so bad, is because Sam Raimi really focuses on the first film as great power. And it's like, okay, Norman Osborn, Peter Parker, they both have powers, right? Both of these powers are new. It happened to them. It was an accident. So what do they do with these powers? Norman Osborn loses his job, loses his life in that instance. And then Peter Parker loses Uncle Ben. So what do they do in these losses? What do they do in these traumatic events? Peter Parker decides to do good with his power. Norman Osborn decides to be irresponsible and just to wreak havoc. So that's the whole theme of the first one, is just about power. What do you do with your power? The second movie with Doc Ock and Spider-Man, it's about responsibility. So here these two guys are geniuses. What do they do with their responsibility? So Doc Ock is irresponsible. Peter Parker is responsible with his powers. And then Peter Parker gets the girl at the end. So it's done. That story arc is done.
Yeah.
But of course they need a third movie. And then that's where like Venom comes in and Sandman. And it's a mess, because I think for like Sam Raimi, he's like, I told the story, but we got to make money. So it's, if Spider-Man 1 and 2 was just that, man.
It would have been the best franchise ever.
Yeah, thematically, it definitely culminates in the second film. I would agree. And then, where do you go from there?
Too bad he didn't go great power, great responsibility, great friendship or something. Like, it's just, it's just like a 2-word thing. He's like, damn it, I should have had a 3rd word in there or something.
Yeah, the story really did end at the end of Spider-Man 2, and I'll say that the last 5 minutes of Spider-Man 2 are probably the best 5 minutes of any movie ever. It was just so cathartic seeing him finally get the girl after the duration of these 2 films and after everything that he had been through. I think that's an amazing point. I think that's really well said. Let's talk about the action in this movie. Now, prior to this film, we had never seen Spider-Man in live action in any sort of satisfying way. Like, they had the made-for-TV movies that were back in the 70s, but it was very cheesy.
They had the Japanese Sentai thing.
That's right. Spider-Man. And most people don't know that, like, he was actually the first, like, Japanese character who would summon, like, this big Megazord-type robot thing.
Right.
He was the first one to do that.
Stan Lee was actually one of the first people to try to get the Power Rangers into America. Like back in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, really? I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how cool that dude was. He gave us so much. He gave us so much. Now, the web swinging that was presented in this film, I think, should be commended because the way it was shot, which was in part CG and in part actual camera work that they tied up on a line and had traversed like on a zip line through downtown Manhattan, it was just amazing. It almost gave me vertigo the first time I saw it. I don't know, maybe if you're younger listening to this podcast, by the time you saw this movie, it wasn't that impressive. But for those of us who were seeing this for the first time, I know quite a few people who said that they got dizzy watching the web swinging. And that was so cool to me because I feel like that's what it would actually be like. It would be pretty barfy, but Spider-Man's cool, so he can get away with it. And he has a strong stomach, I guess. But like how the 1970 Superman movie made you believe a man could fly, this movie absolutely made you believe a man could swing.
And we talked about a little bit about this in our last episode, but yeah, absolutely. Reading the comics, like you just kind of see him, like swinging along. You never think about the physics of it, but seeing it here for the first time, how like the string was elastic and seeing him swing around for the first time, still in his wrestling outfit, it was just so fun to see.
I could watch it again and again and again.
When I was watching this, I thought about just Peter Parker and he has his web go and it attaches to that crane. Like, what makes you go like, hey, I'm going to go from here to there? I'm like, no, like I would never think that. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Can I bring the crane? Like I would try to test my strength. I wouldn't try to say, hey, is this thing strong enough to carry my weight so I could, fall to my death? I would never think that. So I don't know. Peter Parker must have had a couple screws loose because that dude, I don't know what he was thinking in that moment.
He must have been a big Tarzan fan as a kid or something.
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
Or Batman.
Try that. That's true. That's absolutely true.
We know he was a Shazam fan, at least.
That's true. Go,
Oh, yeah.
Web, go. That whole scene to this day just cracks me up. I remember seeing that for the first time and just laughing so hard because his different hand gestures. And why is it like, it's like the love sign or the rock on sign, upside down? What is that? I don't know why it has to be that gesture. Whatever, Sam Raimi. I'll go with it.
That's kind of what makes the whole organic web shooters thing kind of crappy, I guess. Yeah. I was really glad that in subsequent franchises they introduced the mechanical web shooters. Totally. And, organic web shooters, the more you think about it, the grosser it gets. Like, where the fuck is this webbing coming from? Is it, like, coming from, like, armpit sacks or something like that? It's just like, I just imagine, like, all this pussy web just in his body, and it fucking grosses me out.
I always thought, even from watching it for the first time, like, shouldn't this be coming out of his ass?
That's true, huh? Could you imagine? So, like, he's upside down, right? He's saving people, but he's, like, bear hugging them, and he's just, like, swinging from his butthole. And, like, that would be so awesome. And, like, oh, there's Spider-Man, And then he's, like, waving to the people as he has, like, a 5-year-old kid in his left arm. In his right arm, he's waving. It's just your neighborhood Spider-Man, That's good.
And to cut the web line, he would just pinch his cheeks.
Oh, my God.
That's so good. I love that.
I've thought a lot about this.
I need to think more about this.
But since we're talking about web swinging and his powers and stuff, let's get into our character breakdown and talk about Peter Parker / Spider-Man, who is played by Tobey Maguire. What did you guys think about his costume?
Hands down, the best costume. I think they nailed it. It's so classic and iconic, and it's not dated. I look at like the Christopher Reeves Superman costume, it's dated.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that the Michael Keaton Batman suit is dated, but he can't move his freaking head left to right. So, but I think this costume is like, you can't really do better than that, Different variations of the colors. Like I've always loved the Miles Morales, like black and red. I just think it looks cooler. But as far as like on screen, this is a fantastic costume, and especially like the eyes where it's reflective. And one of the most powerful scenes, I think, is towards the end where they have that close-up of Spider-Man, and you see the cable car on one side of his eye reflective glass, and then Mary Jane. And it's like that. Those are the scenes where it's like, man, this is a excellent movie with just little shots like that where you just feel the emotion in just a quick second.
Yeah,
that was a great shot.
They did a lot of great things with the lenses, like especially even in the posters for all of the Spider-Man films in this franchise, specifically the Sam Raimi one. But no, they really nailed the costume like right off the bat. It was definitely the first like most faithful, most timeless costume. It definitely, like everything else, also set a standard for costuming. And I think in a way, to subsequent films' detriments, because when they try to reinvent, Spider-Man's costume in The Amazing Spider-Man, that thing looked like ass.
I hate the Amazing Spider-Man costume.
And then they had to do like other like slight tweaks when he was first introduced in the MCU, for better or worse. I do really like the lenses of the MCU Spider-Man and how they're able to like shrink and grow. But there is something to be said, like you mentioned, for the reflections that you see. You could do so much with it.
Yeah. I think one of the primary reasons that this costume worked so well as opposed to previous superhero costumes like Christopher Reeve's Superman was that they added a lot of texture to the suit by raising the webbing, by having that hexagonal pattern within the stretchy fabric. It made it seem more like sports oriented, I guess, like active wear, as opposed to just putting on tights.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be real, the Spider-Man costume in itself is kind of lame. It's just a spandex, right? Like, it's a onesie, and you can buy those on Amazon for like $40. And when people put it on, it doesn't look cool. You're like, all right, So, but they made this look cool, and I was thinking, like, Peter Parker shouldn't have been a photographer. He should have been in like fashion design. Like, I'm like, he drew a perfect Spider-Man outfit. He put that together. We don't see how he did it. Like, where did he get the material? He could have been rich. He could have been hanging out with hot models and making all this fashion. He could have been like Calvin Klein and stuff. So Peter Parker, what are you doing, dude?
He could have been a model.
Exactly, like Spider-Man 3, walking down the street, with his emo hair. He's got the catwalk down.
I think Tobey Maguire definitely filled out the suit better than prior superheroes as well. Maybe not like Wesley Snipes, but definitely like Michael Keaton or Christopher Reeves. And Christopher Reeves, he was physically imposing. But in terms of just being like physically like cut,
right?
I think Tobey takes the cake there.
Yeah, dude was shredded to hell.
Yeah, granted, he's only like 115 pounds, but, it's all good.
That's true. Now, in terms of Tobey's performance, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with my feelings on it. On one hand, I don't think his boyish voice and severe case of what I call Tobey Maguire face suits Spider-Man. Like, that's not really the voice you want to hear coming out from that mask because it's so unconfident and kind of mopey.
What? I loved it. I thought it was like the perfect Spider-Man voice. It's close to what I've always heard, from the comics.
I think Christopher Daniel Barnes is like the best Spider-Man voice.
Yeah.
The voice of the animated series. But yeah, Tobey Maguire, I don't know, like it's a very specific type of Peter Parker. I wouldn't say this is the Peter Parker from the comics really, because what this movie is missing is just that confidence when Peter Parker puts on the suit. Then he gets cocky. He starts, making fun of the villains. And, he becomes not a bully, but he becomes this like different person almost. Like the inner ego comes out where Peter Parker has a fragile ego. He's really timid. So that has been always one of my critiques. And actually, what I love about The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield is those banters and stuff like that. But I'm with you. I don't think that boyish voice is Peter Parker.
Yeah. It's just I wasn't used to it. But Tobey Maguire's strange eye and mouth movements and his weird secret sex lips often distract me from his acting.
What the fuck?
Do you remember that from Deadpool 2? When Deadpool was talking to the orderly guy, he was like, your weird secret sex lips? I think Tobey Maguire has those. I don't know. Just
Okay.
Maybe he just has a thing for Tobey. Do you have a thing for Tobey Maguire, Joe?
well, I didn't think I did, but now I'm starting to. All that being said, I do think that Tobey Maguire gives a subtly heartfelt performance, and despite his Tobey Maguire face, he is endearing as a hero. You want to see him succeed because, in a way, he represents the unconfident boy in all of us that eventually grew into men. And one of the best praises I can give this movie is that it has wonderful character development, from the film's opening lines of, "The story of my life is not for the faint of heart," and the end lines of, "This is my gift, my curse." And by that point, I was like, holy ass, that is Peter Parker. His performance made me believe in the character's growth.
I think one of the reasons I really liked Tobey Maguire's performance was because it was so awkward, and someone who, like, especially at 16, super fucking awkward, like, he sold the comedy of the film in a way that I don't think a lot of actors could. Like, just his mannerisms and his deliveries alone were funny, like, maybe unintentionally, but, like, also in a charming way.
Let's move on to Norman Osborn / Green Goblin, who is played by Willem Dafoe. Now, Willem is one of the greatest actors of his generation. Absolutely. I definitely buy him as Norman Osborn. He has all the traits, the shrewdness, the intelligence, and he also has a severe case of Willem Dafoe face, where it makes him look like a goblin.
Yep.
But I do have to say that he does ham it up a bit in this movie.
Yeah, it looked like he had a lot of fun with the role and just went kind of crazy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe is a fantastic actor, and he gives 100% in every role. And what's great is he's really strategic. He's not in a whole lot of blockbuster movies, which he could, but, it's the reason why you can see him in a movie like Boondock Saints, right? And he makes every movie better. And this portrayal of Norman Osborn is one of the most underrated villains, right? The performance of the Green Goblin, yeah, it's campy, yeah, it's kind of over the top, but I think it works because Green Goblin is kind of like that, is almost that Joker-esque character, in the comics. So yeah. I think it's phenomenal.
I actually, for the first time watching this, kind of felt that Green Goblin was one of the weaker aspects of the film in a way that I hadn't really noticed in prior viewings. And I think part of it has to do with his motivations. We talked a few episodes ago during our Wonder Woman 1984 review how Cheetah was a weak villain because she wasn't evil of her own fault. It was kind of like a consequence of her wish. All of a sudden, they took away her humanity, right? And in this case, I kind of got similar vibes. He became insane because of the serum. And now, of course, he was irresponsible in performing the gas serum on himself, those performance enhancers. But I'm left wondering, like, why he's doing what he's doing. Is it just because of the serum? Is it because, of, like, prior trauma in his life? Why is he such a dick to begin with? Things like that.
I also had an issue with the motivations of the character in this movie. It's hard to know what his end goals are, because they don't really state that explicitly. We just know that he wants power, and he doesn't really have any motivations outside of his own selfish ambition. When he finds out that Spider-Man's around, he goes after him. When he finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, he goes after him. When he finds out that Mary Jane's in love with Peter, he goes after Mary Jane. It's all kind of on an ad hoc basis. And without that sort of arc for the Green Goblin character, it kind of leaves the reasoning behind his actions as kind of weak. That being said, it is a testament to Willem Dafoe's acting that you rarely recognize that fault with the character.
Right. Yeah, I definitely thought Dr. Octopus's, goal of remaking his machine and everything like that to get that right was a much better arc and goal, as opposed to, I'm just going to, pick on Spider-Man for some reason. Yeah. It's not explicitly really stated. Just another powerful guy that he wants on his side.
It is, you guys are right, it is weak, but I would say that the motivation, although it's not clear, it's that he got fired, right? Like, Oscorp, he created this entire empire, and then, like, the board wants him off. And so he's just basically like, screw you, he's going to go for revenge. And then Spider-Man stops him. And then he's like, I should get Spider-Man on my side. And then I'll be unstoppable with this guy. And then it gets convoluted because he sees that Spider-Man's going to stop him, finds out he's Peter Parker. And then he's like, well, I got to eliminate the threat. So it is convoluted, and you have to, like, really think about it, which doesn't make it a great motivation in general.
Because where would the Green Goblin story go if Spider-Man weren't around? He would have killed the guys at the World Unity Festival, but where would he have gone from there, do you think? What was his end goal?
The Sinister Six?
Yeah, that's right. That's where it went.
Yeah.
What did you guys think about his costume, the Green Goblin costume?
You know, I didn't hate it. I know a lot of people rag on it because, you know, it wasn't like the purple rags and stuff like that. But I think it made a little bit more sense in this world. Maybe the helmet was a little bit over the top. Like, who the fuck designed that and who took the time to do that? But I think it worked as an on-screen costume for a villain.
Yeah, you know what's funny is he didn't call himself the Green Goblin. So what was going on in Norman Osborn's mind? Like, he's like, yeah, I'm going to look like a monster, like this like goblin-looking thing, you know?
Right.
Because it would be different if he's like, no, I'm taking on this identity. I'm taking on this persona. I am the Green Goblin. But no, it's just some dude, you know, walking around looking like a clown, basically. No, but I think it's cool. I hate the mouth. I hate that you can see him talk. It's so distracting in certain scenes where you can see Willem Dafoe talking.
Yeah.
But I think because in the comics, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just like a latex costume type thing. And that wouldn't work. You know, we don't need a Scooby-Doo kind of costume and, you know, Green Goblin, you know, that would be stupid. So I think to make it for that time and to make it a little more realistic, I think it still stands. Yeah, it's kind of dated. And again, the mouth thing is really bad, but it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, they definitely couldn't go the latex route. I think they rationalized the helmet within the context of this movie as kind of almost being like a motorcycle helmet. He wears it for protection when he's riding on the glider. And so they kind of designed it and modeled it after that, including his suit, which kind of looks like a biker suit.
Yeah, they also established that he has like a collection of masks, Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn character, in his mansion, right? So maybe he kind of ran with that kind of vibe, wearing a mask to sort of strike fear into your enemies.
Yeah. I'm not sure how you would improve the mask. Like, would you give it a moving mouthpiece? Would that work? I'm not entirely sure.
I don't think so.
When Willem Dafoe would act while he was speaking, he would act like how the Power Rangers characters act. Like, when they speak, they like bob their head like this. And that's like a horrible way to convey that you're speaking behind a mask. Just speak. You know, we know that it's coming from you because it's your voice. You don't have to shake your head like you're fucking Power Ranger.
That's so good.
I'm really curious to see how they approach the costume in the MCU. Because the MCU costumes have been so faithful. I wonder what they'll do for the Green Goblin there.
Well, judging off of Vulture's outfit and Mysterio's outfit, whatever they decide to do for Green Goblin, they're going to fucking nail it. I just know it.
Yeah. And it's going to be some kind of Stark Industry thing because everything is Stark Industry.
Exactly.
I do hope that like Oscorp becomes like the new Stark Industries in the MCU. I think that'll be cool. I think it just makes sense.
That would be cool. Let's move on to Mary Jane Watson, who was played by Kirsten Dunst. Now, I think Kirsten gets kind of looked down on nowadays because she kind of earned some fanboy ire after making a few negative comments about other Spider-Man productions and even her own films, and her performance in Spider-Man 3 seemed a bit tired and phoned in, and some people say she has severe Kirsten Dunst face.
Oh my gosh.
In this film, I actually found her really quite sweet and fun, traits that I would absolutely attribute to MJ from the comics.
Yeah, I think it's fine. To me, when I think of this movie, I don't think of Mary Jane or her performance as like a character, more of like the idea, like she's the girl. And I think that's where I think could have been better. I really wish that Gwen Stacy, honestly, was the character, not MJ, because there's something about Gwen Stacy where that is Peter Parker's first love and she died. And that really shapes who Peter Parker is. So I get it. I think they're trying to take a little bit from the animated series because MJ was, you know, the girl then. But yeah, Kirsten Dunst, I mean, it's okay. You know, I was thinking about this. I'm like, dude, I haven't seen her really in a movie in a long time, like a prominent movie. I was like, where did she go?
Yeah, she's just kind of living off of the Spider-Man residuals, you know?
Yeah. Good for her.
Yeah, for sure. She wouldn't have been my first choice for Mary Jane. But I do think she has good chemistry with Tobey Maguire. Weren't they dating at the time that this movie was made?
They were dating right after this movie.
Well, that explains that. But I don't think her performance was bad. I don't think it was that great either. Honestly, there were a few scenes where I'm like, I think like your timing is a little bit off. And I could, you know, definitely tell that you're acting. It's definitely a performance. But you know, I do agree that Gwen Stacy would have been a better choice. Mm-hmm. There's so much iconic imagery, I think, in this film of like, you know, the girl falling. That's Gwen Stacy. You know, that's how she dies. that kind of makes it more difficult to establish such a powerful story as Gwen Stacy's, I think, later on in the films. And that's why Gwen Stacy was done so horribly in the third movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, to the Amazing Spider-Man franchise's credit, they did try to do that right, where they established Gwen Stacy as his first love prior to hooking up with MJ. And Kirsten Dunst's performance was a little bit on the melodramatic side for sure. But am I the only one that had kind of a crush on her when I was a teenager?
Yes.
Yes? Fuck.
Not me. Not me.
God damn.
I mean, they did have like the whole like wet t-shirt thing, which was
Right.
kind of did something, but I don't know if I would say it's a crush.
Can we talk about that scene real quick?
Sure.
Like, can we talk, because that's one of the most iconic like scenes. But I was thinking about it, like, okay, MJ takes off the mask. First of all, why doesn't she just take the whole thing off? It doesn't make any sense. Just like, I'll just take off like the mouthpiece, right? That's stupid. And then also, like, if you're Spider-Man, it's raining. He's upside down. Water's going to be going in your nose. She's kissing him. He's not going to be able to breathe. So he's probably going to like vomit in her mouth or something. He's like, you know, like it's like supposed to be a romantic scene. But I'm like, in reality, dude, this is a mess, you know? And I
totally.
feel like at this point, he's trying to figure out, like, do I tell her? Do I not? And she's trying to take off his mask. I feel like he would just like, hey, don't touch my mask, you know? So in reality, that scene is not romantic. It's a lot of problems. But yeah, I was just picturing, you know, water going down his nose and, you know, he's trying to like gasp for air and he ends up barfing.
Well, it's funny that you say that because I remember reading Wizard magazine around the time that this movie came out, and they had an interview with Tobey Maguire, and he said that exactly. He was like, yeah, it may have looked good, but while we were filming it, I was struggling because all the blood was rushing to my head, and there was water getting in my mask and in my nose and in my eyes and everything, and it was just horrible to film. So, yeah, you're spot on with that
As a
observation.
16-year-old, that was like the most romantic scene I had ever seen. I hadn't kissed a girl yet, and I just dreamed of kissing a girl that way. I have since then. It's not great at all.
You've kissed a girl upside down? I just realized I don't want to hear anything about that.
Yeah, what do you get into behind closed doors?
Oh, God. Let's move on to Harry Osborn, who's played by James Franco. This was the first time I had seen Franco in any role because I never watched Freaks and Geeks at the time. I think he's a great actor. He definitely has the James Franco face going, but in this case, that's a good thing because he's a good-looking dude. But despite the fact that he's much more attractive than Willem Dafoe, he's still believable as his son. I thought it was great casting.
Oh, yeah.
I wish he had more to work with. You know, he's a great actor, but like the lines, and it's not even the delivery. It's just kind of the lines and the story arc. It's just like, you know, he yells at his girlfriend. He's like, I just want to be half the man that my father is. It's like, give him a little more. Give him a little more than that.
Yeah. I definitely think that he made the most of what he had to work with from the script. You know, even like the little moments when Osborn congratulates Peter Parker about how, like, you want to make it on your own. He respects that, you know, and they cut to Harry and just the look on his face. I think it's little moments like that that really make the character someone that you care about. And, you know, other than the fact that he's a really good friend of this character that no one else seems to want to be friends with.
Yeah, I think his arc was lacking, but what he had did come from a very understandable place where he was under constant criticism from his father and he never felt good enough. You sympathize with him, but you also see how his path is eventually going to turn him into his father. So it's a little bit tragic in that regard. He's also kind of an ass, though. Like, obviously, Peter Parker had no sort of ownership over Mary Jane, but the fact that he went after his bro's crush is just not part of the bro code.
Right.
You know? It's not something you do as a bro.
Number one of the bro code. You don't do it.
Right. Especially if you're living with them, right? And you didn't mention anything.
Totally.
Like,
What a dick.
What a dick. I was just going to say that. What a dick.
I was glad that they gave him more to do in Spider-Man 3, where he eventually became the Green Goblin, like how that character did in the comics, but it was done in a very dissatisfying way, ultimately.
Yeah, like the hoverboard.
Yeah.
The fuck.
Well, I liked the hoverboard. I just didn't like...
I like the Goblin Glider way more.
Yeah, okay, that's true. I definitely like the Goblin Glider more than the hoverboard. Where do you land on the hoverboard Goblin Glider debate, Max?
Probably Glider.
Yeah.
It's just cooler. Yeah. And then it's a mess in the Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh, God.
He looks like, I don't know, like, have you guys seen that horror movie Trolls 2? He looks like one of those things.
I've seen clips from it. And
Yeah. He totally looks like one of those trolls. When I saw that, I was like, all right, no, this movie sucks.
yeah, the Green Goblin in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 that was a bad way to approach it. He looked like he had just a really severe venereal disease. And it was disgusting. It was really gross.
You should see a doctor about that, man.
Seriously.
Should go get some antibiotics.
Damn.
Never stop taking them. Let's move into the final characters in our character breakdown. Aunt May, who was played by Rosemary Harris. Watching this movie again made me realize how much I do prefer an old, fragile Aunt May because she's such a treasure. You know, part of Spider-Man's appeal involves how careful he has to be with his secret identity because of how much he cherishes his loving but very vulnerable aunt.
Yeah, I definitely love like old Aunt May as opposed to like younger hot Aunt May like Marissa Tomei.
Yeah, I think that's something the new Spider-Man movies haven't really gotten because like in the Homecoming movies, all of his friends seem to have plot armor, but Spider-Man as a hero is in part defined by the losses he experiences.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. It's like Uncle Ben said he was like 68, so that makes Aunt May in her 60s. And if it's like their aunt, then how old is Peter Parker's parents and stuff? So it kind of like, you know, Homecoming, the MCU wanted to update that, but I'm in agreement. The older Aunt May, that's just what I've grown up with, and that's what I'm used to. And especially like in the animated series, she looks like a walking corpse almost.
Yeah, she does. Sunken in cheeks.
Yeah, you know, it's a small role in this movie. It develops more as the series goes on, but I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always kind of saw Aunt May as his great aunt. And in a way, I thought that kind of made the relationship a little bit more special because it is a little bit farther removed, and yet she still cares for him as much as, you know, a mother would.
Well, she's his aunt-in-law in the comics. It was
really?
Ben that was related to Peter Parker's family.
Oh, that's even more special then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to see in the third Spider-Man film, in the Homecoming franchise, I would like to see Marissa Tomei's Aunt May actually get put into dire peril for once. And then see Spider-Man like react strongly to that and go and save her. The last character we want to talk about is J. Jonah Jameson, who is played by J.K. Simmons to absolute perfection. J.K. Simmons is a great character actor. I'm so glad that they brought him back for the Homecoming franchise because his performance was just hilarious and it never gets old watching it.
How much of it was ad-libbed? I have to know that because it just seems so natural, especially like his banter with Sam Raimi's brother. I forget the character's name.
Ted Raimi.
Yeah. And he was like, how about Green Meanie? And J.K. Simmons just like, you know. Just stuff like that is just hilarious.
Yeah, I honestly, this is one of the best from page to screens. I mean, there's a reason why he got brought back. It's phenomenal. Have you guys seen Whiplash?
Oh, yeah.
It's so good. He's such a great actor. Anything that he's in, you're like, I love this guy. He's a phenomenal actor.
I would have loved to have seen more of him as Commissioner Gordon. I thought he would have really done a lot with that role in like a standalone Batman film.
And he's the voice of the yellow peanut M&M.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, to go from that to winning an Oscar, that's awesome. What a great career.
Yeah, great career. All right, that does it for all the characters, so let's go ahead and get into our story highlights. The movie starts off during a field trip to Columbia University, and I thought this was a nice scene because it served to really establish the characters and their relationships with each other, but also served as a means to deliver a lot of exposition regarding Spider-Man's abilities that he gets when he gets bitten by the genetically engineered spider.
That first scene, it kind of felt clunky.
Yeah.
I don't know. It felt like, what am I watching? Almost. I wasn't gravitated toward what was going on.
Yeah. And look at this spider. He can lift 8 times his strength. And this spider has the ability to jump. It's like, okay.
Well, it maybe felt clunky because it was doing multiple things at the same time, explaining Spider-Man's powers and explaining their relationships with each other, the main characters. It always kind of annoyed me how there were like 13 super spiders. Like, are you telling me that none of the other researchers ever got bit by any of these other spiders and got spider powers?
Right?
It was always kind of bizarre.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I always thought like right after he got bit, like Peter Parker should have just like stepped on that spider and just like killed it. So like no one else could get bit by it.
That's what they did in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics.
Oh, really?
Yeah. From that scene, after Peter Parker gets bit, we visit Oscorp and we learn about how Norman is about to lose his defense contract to another company called Quest Aerospace. But his company is working on a military contract regarding a glider and performance enhancers, like a super soldier serum, kind of.
I was always kind of surprised how unimpressed that general was with like the glider and like the suit and everything. I was
Right.
like, really? I think that's worth a defense contract.
Maybe the general was like, did you see what Tony Stark was offering me? This ain't nothing.
Yeah, you know that if this movie took place in the MCU, they would definitely make both a reference to Stark Industries and the Captain America Super Soldier Serum.
Absolutely.
From Oscorp, we revisit Peter Parker, who gets sick, and he undergoes his change, and he wakes up buff as hell. And Norman Osborn also undergoes a transformation by experimenting on himself back at Oscorp. Peter starts discovering his powers while at school, and away from school, he learns that he can climb up walls, and he has Spidey sense, which he learns in a fight with Flash Thompson, and that he can swing from webs. I thought all of this was handled really well, and it's some of my most favorite, like, discovering your powers scenes in all of superhero movie history.
Yeah, the cafeteria scene, I just loved that. Like every moment from catching all of the food on the tray when it was up in the air to like discovering that he had like webbing coming from his body, just like pulling the fork off.
Ugh.
It was all really well done.
Yeah, the one thing that always bugs me about the high school stuff is just how old all the actors are. Like, there are 30, 32. I mean, like, Deathstroke is a grown man. He's like 40 in this movie.
Right.
So it's never believable. Even when I watched it the first time, I was like, this is not believable, which I appreciate about, having Tom Holland and Zendaya, because they're younger. They actually look like high school students. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like the whole high school part, it's okay. I love the slow-mo in this movie. It could have been really cheesy, especially coming off the heels of Matrix in 99.
Yeah.
Like, it could have been cliche. It was cliche by then, but it was a fresh take of the slow-mo, and it still, to this day, looks phenomenal.
Yeah, it kind of took what like the Matrix did and did it in a new good way that didn't seem like it was ripping it off or anything like that. And it made sense story-wise.
So after he discovers his powers, he goes home that night and he has a talk with MJ, at the end of which he realizes Flash Thompson got a new car. And, he wants to impress MJ, so he looks at the classifieds looking for a car and learns that there's this wrestling competition that will offer him $3,000 if he lasts for 3 minutes.
And it's not just 3 minutes in a ring. It's 3 minutes of playtime. Bonesaw. I was like, immediately when I saw Randy Savage on there, I was like, I want a Slim Jim.
Step into a Slim Jim.
R.I.P. Man, I miss Randy
totally.
Savage so much.
So on Peter's way to the ring, he gets the "with great power comes great responsibility" lesson from Uncle Ben, and he goes in the match.
What I love about this movie is, one, Bruce Campbell's in it as the announcer.
Oh, yes.
And then the second thing is, this movie insinuates that wrestling is real. And I'm all for that, Like, it makes it look like they're actually in a fight. And I'm like, cool, because at 12 years old, I was totally watching wrestling. This is like the kind of peak of the Attitude Era, or as it starts to transition, I'm like, hey, wrestling's definitely real.
I thought it was so messed up how Bonesaw kept getting help from his side ring girls, and like they gave him a fucking crowbar. I'm like, how the hell is this not murder? Like, how does this wrestling organization get away with it? Because it looks real. He's actually beating him with that chair, and now he's about to beat the shit out of him with a crowbar. That's pretty hardcore.
Because wrestling.
Yeah, when he took out the Flying Dutchman, like that stunt was no joke. Oh. That guy looked like he broke his neck. And then like later on, he's like, oh, my legs. Oh, God, I can't feel my legs. I still crack up. So hilarious.
I love how Bruce Campbell was the one that gave Spider-Man his name. From the human spider to Spider-Man. I thought that was
the Amazing
really nice
Spider-Man,
touch.
too.
The Amazing Spider-Man is so good.
During the wrestling scene, I was surprised to see Octavia Spencer.
Yes!
Oh, that's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
she was the registration table.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, it must have been really early in her career, because she is a phenomenal actress. That and Elizabeth Banks. You look at it, you're like, there's a lot of recognizable people in this.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of up-and-comers for sure. Mm-hmm. The way that they presented the whole robbery scene, I thought was a little bit unfair, because I feel like if I were in Peter Parker's situation, I absolutely would have done the same thing, and it would have been justified.
The guy's running at you with the gun.
Exactly.
Hey, stop him. I'm like, no. I will step to the side.
Did they want his ass to get shot or something? What the hell were they expecting? That wasn't going to happen.
It's because he just defeated their hero, Bonesaw. They're like, Bonesaw's defeated. If anyone could defeat Bonesaw, you could defeat a guy with a gun running at you.
If you could defeat Bonesaw, you must be bulletproof. It's ridiculous. But, nevertheless, he lets the guy go by, and we see that Uncle Ben has been shot by the same robber. I did really like this chase scene that followed, where Peter Parker suits up in his wrestling costume and goes and pursues his uncle's murderer.
I thought the death scene of Uncle Ben was pretty powerful. I haven't seen the Amazing Spider-Man version of that, but I would find it hard to believe that it was better than this.
It's not. It's not.
And yeah, not surprised. Cliff Robertson just does an amazing job as Uncle Ben.
What I was thinking about when I was watching this scene was, dude, Peter Parker just abandons his uncle's dead body in the nasty streets of New York. Like, there's rats everywhere. I was like, come on, dude. Like, at least, be there for the coroners to come and stuff. He's like, forget that. He's dead. I want revenge. And I was like, that's kind of trashy. Kind of trashy, Peter.
It was pretty callous, for sure.
Revenge.
So after he apprehends the robber, and the robber dies by falling out of a window, Peter Parker is racked by tremendous guilt, primarily because of the last thing that he said to Uncle Ben was just hurtful.
You're not my real dad.
Green Goblin dons the goblin armor for the first time and kills everybody at Quest Aerospace in an effort to get the defense contract back. From there, we see Peter Parker graduate from Midtown High. Afterward, there's a touching scene between Peter Parker and Aunt May where they just have a moment of missing Uncle Ben. I thought Rosemary Harris's performance here was really moving. It's surprising that she lost the love of her life, and yet she's the one that's comforting him. She's just such a strong woman. From there, we get the Spider-Man montage, which I thought was really well done. This is where the whole World Trade Center scene would have happened from that World Trade Center teaser trailer where the helicopter gets caught in between the two towers. But they kind of nixed that and showed other cool Spider-Man saving the day moments.
Right. They had to. This is like right after 9/11.
Right.
Yeah.
We were not ready for that, as fresh as that was.
Yeah.
We weren't ready to see anything like that.
It was kind of nice how they incorporated just like seemingly random New Yorkers, I think, in some scenes. It seems like they actually did go to like New York and just say, hey, say something about Spider-Man. I could be wrong. They could be all actors, but it seemed authentic, which was really nice during that time.
Well, we did see Lucy Lawless. We know that she is an actress.
That's true.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see her in like punk rock mode.
Right. And the relationship there is Sam Raimi was a producer on Xena. So there's the tie-in right there.
That's right.
Yeah. From the montage, we get our first glimpse at the Daily Bugle and J.K. Simmons' wonderful performance as J. Jonah Jameson. It's really hilarious, and he puts out a call for photos of Spider-Man since Spider-Man is selling a lot of newspapers. But his interaction with his whole staff, like with Elizabeth Banks, and he's telling her to put down the phone, and like he hangs up on his wife and stuff. It's
perfect.
Can't get enough of that dude.
It's perfect.
From there, after the boardroom meeting where we learned that Norman Osborn is being basically bought out of his role as the head of Oscorp, we go to the World Unity Festival where Peter Parker is taking photos and Norman Osborn seeks out his revenge on the board.
I could see why Norman Osborn would have been pissed, because that was really messed up of his board to do that. Holy crap.
Yeah. It's his name, right? My freaking name is on this company, and you're going to make this decision without me? Screw you guys. I think a character like Norman Osborn, that's all about power. He is at the top, right? Mm-hmm. And he got to this huge corporation. And for that to be taken from underneath him, like, that is all the power that his whole life probably has built up to that moment, and he doesn't even get a say in it. Like, I think it's more disrespectful and be like, oh, no. Yeah. I'm taking control of this situation. You don't get to make that decision for me.
Yeah, that's absolutely valid. Yeah. I did like the Green Goblin's entrance to the World Unity Festival. I thought it was pretty eerie the way the music played in, as he almost looks like the Wicked Witch of the West on the flying broom coming in.
Good call.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and I like the way his pumpkin bombs worked. He really felt like a credible threat. I really liked all the gadgets that he had and like the guns that he had on the Goblin Glider as he was fighting Spider-Man and stuff.
I do remember the first time I saw this, like, I think the audience was a little bit more apprehensive or concerned about this scene. At least I know I was. Just, hearing this like airplane kind of sound coming in through New York. It definitely like added some tension to the scene, seeing it at that time than it does, nowadays.
Yeah.
I completely forgot about that. That's true.
I always loved the scene where Spider-Man is jumping off the balloons or the floats or whatever. Yeah. I just thought it was so cool. Like, just to see like something like that where he's just so agile, it looked really cool.
Yeah, great visuals in this scene.
Yeah.
Great set piece for sure. The scene ends with him pulling out the wires from the Goblin Glider and Goblin melodramatically yelling, "We'll meet again, Spider-Man!" And then he saves Mary Jane. which I thought was a really nice scene. While Spider-Man is handing his photos to J. Jonah Jameson of the event, the Green Goblin crashes the scene, demanding to know who the photographer is that takes the photos of Spider-Man. From there, he kidnaps Spidey and offers him an ultimatum. Either they join together or he kills him.
That was one thing I really didn't get. It's like, join together to do what exactly? He mentioned like killing millions of people, and it's like, why? Why would he want to do that?
Well, at the time, Spider-Man's a menace. So the people have turned on him. And they could have gone into that more and saying, look, you're trying to save the people who hate you. You're a villain.
They did slightly touch on it at the very end when he says, you know, like, I promise you they will turn on you, that kind of thing. But yeah, they didn't really elaborate on it.
Yeah, he basically says it's not worth it being a hero. Come join me and we'll hang out. We'll play video games or something, you know. After that scene, Goblin leaves him and Peter Parker goes and visits Mary Jane after a failed audition. It starts raining and some guys try to attack her. He fends them off and they make out heavily and you see some pokies and Spider-Man gets some water up his nose.
I do have to say that action scene is pretty cool when he takes those guys out. When he's just like pulling them, standing on top of that like light post, that was so cool.
Yeah, I think what made this such an appealing action scene is that you could tell that it was all practical. There was little to no computer effects done within that scene. It was choreographed.
Right. Yeah.
Which I miss because now Spider-Man, most of those scenes are computerized and CG and stuff like that. And practical will always be superior to CGI, in my opinion, when it comes to fight scenes.
For sure.
Absolutely. After that scene, we have the burning building fight where Spider-Man goes into a burning building to save an old woman, but it turns out that the old woman is Green Goblin, which I thought was kind of a neat little trick. And it's such a great scene because Goblin throws the razor bats at him, and the movie's design of the razor bats is so cool. I really love the slow motion dodging of those two.
Dude, that scene where the woman turns and it's Green Goblin scared the crap out of me. I'm like 12, right? I was not expecting that. I was like, oh, you know? And that's where Sam Raimi, he throws in a little horror, you know?
Yeah.
Even in the beginning of the movie where Norman Osborn is changing, there's like flashes of those skeletons. It's like very Evil Dead-esque. And even in the beginning where Norman has the gas and his eyes go completely white, he looks just like a Deadite from Evil Dead.
That's
so
true.
You see this, and then he turns around, and just the setting, I was totally scared at like 12. I was like, holy crap, I was not expecting that. That woman is ugly.
You know, there were a lot of complaints at the time that this movie came out from parents with young children who found the Green Goblin too scary. And I thought that was hilarious because I just thought that made the Green Goblin all the more badass. So after the burning building fight where Spider-Man rejects Green Goblin's offer, we have the Thanksgiving scene where Norman Osborn realizes that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
It's super forced.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have a cut? You must be Spider-Man. Like, what?
Why couldn't it have just been a bike messenger?
Right. Exactly. It was a huge jump, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not believing that.
So knowing that Peter Parker is now Spider-Man, Green Goblin goes and attacks Aunt May in one of the most ridiculous scenes ever when she's saying her nightly prayers and he busts in as she's about to say from evil and he's like, finish it. And she's like, from evil. It was so bad.
He was just waiting for that specific moment. He was like, oh, okay. I'm going to do it right before she says, this is going to be so badass.
Right.
What part of the prayer is she on right now? I have to remember. They are following. Okay, here we go. Boom.
You know, he goes, finish it. And then Scorpion comes out and spears Aunt May in the head. Toosh, fatality.
And then comic book Scorpion would have been like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Who's this guy? Amazing.
After that, we get a few moments in the hospital where Peter and MJ have a sweet, tender moment where he kind of confesses his feelings for her in a roundabout way, kind of a passive way, but the message kind of gets through.
It was sweet. It was charming.
Harry walks in and sees that the two are falling for each other.
I felt like that scene is so awkward. The way that cuts, it's just like James Franco just comes in and he just goes, oh, like there's no words or anything. Like I was like, what happened after, right?
Right.
That's true.
It's like, it just ends. I'm like, okay, but what? You know, like what happened? What was the dialogue? Did, Harry go to Aunt May? Did he leave? Like, I want to know more.
Like there were some raised voices after that. Like right after that, there had to have been.
I don't know. Neither of them seem like too prone to confrontation at all. So I wouldn't be surprised if like he just walked right back out or something.
He's like, oh, sorry, I need to validate my parking. I'll be right back.
He tells his dad that MJ dumped him and is falling in love with Peter. So Green Goblin kidnaps MJ and takes her to the bridge that leads to Roosevelt Island. And Spider-Man has to save her, as well as a group of kids who are, I guess, on a field trip or something to Roosevelt Island. I don't know why the hell you would take a field trip to Roosevelt Island in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But that happened.
Logic.
And I thought it was pretty cool how he managed to save both of them. I thought it was a great tension-filled scene, primarily due to the tension in the web line that is used to support both the gondola and Mary Jane.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
It's so good. And just the slow-mo. And, if you're a avid Spider-Man comic reader, you could see the tension. Like, this is the huge tension. Peter Parker, do I save my family or do I save the civilians, the people that need me? So, like, that little scene is kind of the overall theme of Peter Parker's struggle of family and doing what's right.
Yeah, totally. He has like a huge weight on his shoulders, right? For protecting everyone. And in terms of tension, like when I first saw this, I was absolutely on the edge of my seat, not knowing if like Mary Jane was going to end up like Gwen Stacy, how he was going to possibly save both. And I agree, the way they ended up doing it was really well done.
What I really didn't kind of like about this scene, though, was how it kind of culminated with Spider-Man being saved by the New Yorkers. Now, I like the sentiment. I like the idea of it. But in execution, it was kind of cheesy as hell, in my opinion. What did you guys think?
I wonder if that was written after 9/11, because at that time, like, the entire nation was behind New York and the New Yorkers and stuff. And I think that was kind of the image of like, hey, this tragedy happened in our city, but we will fight back. We will be stronger. We will stand together. So even watching it this time, I was like, oh, I wonder if that was just a nod to the city of New York and the resiliency of the city.
Do you think that throwing garbage at the Green Goblin would have actually stopped him in the way that it did?
Absolutely not.
They should have been throwing like baseball bats and stuff. I mean, wasn't one guy holding one? I think he was.
Yeah. They're lucky he didn't throw a pumpkin bomb at him because he had a lot better weapons than they did.
That's true.
But the idea was nice. I really do like, though, how he was able to wrap the cable around Spider-Man and tug him, which was, homage to that scene when it happened in the comics and he flew around the city with Spider-Man maskless. And they go into the abandoned factory fight, which I thought was pretty damn hardcore. I liked this fight. Spider-Man gets his fucking dick kicked in.
Yeah.
I really love how Green Goblin just brought it. I thought it really served to highlight him as an absolute threat to Peter Parker. I had no idea how the hell he was going to get out of it because anything that Spider-Man tried to do to try to defend himself or fight back, Green Goblin was just stopping dead in his tracks.
It was kind of silly. It seemed very Power Rangers in this moment when he's like doing like spin, twist, kicks and stuff like that. Just the wire work. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I love the very end of that scene where the glider like is all of a sudden really quiet and like very stealthy.
Yeah.
And then it just goes. And of course, Spider-Man has his spider senses, so he flips. And then Willem Dafoe just goes, oh. Like it's super, like corny. I could have done without it, but he just goes, oh. And then he dies, you know?
It's very Sam Raimi.
Totally.
Yeah. Now, in the comics, Green Goblin, gets hit in the chest. But for this movie, the first time I noticed this, he gets like stabbed like right in the crotch.
Yeah, he gets cut in the dick. Not kicked. he gets slashed right in the genital area. It was pretty hardcore. Now, like in the comics, his Goblin glider had like that center column that the wing sprouted from, and it was that ramming into his chest. It kind of caved in his chest and impaled him. In this, they gave the glider blades, which I thought was really badass.
What do you guys think about those last words that Green Goblin says? Please don't tell Harry. Does that kind of make him redeemable? Like he's the father looking out for his son? Or is he more looking out for his own reputation and his own legacy?
I think it was both. I don't think he was a good father. So I think it was sort of selfish on his part for not wanting to tell Harry because he wanted his legacy to be kept intact and stuff like that. But I do think some small part of him did care for Harry. And I think Harry felt that for the first time in the scene between the two prior. When he like finally hugs his son, finally admits like, hey, I haven't been the best father. and, gives him a hug. I think Harry's waited his whole life for that. So it's sort of a little bit more tragic when his father is dead the next time he sees him.
Yeah. As much as I would like to think that Norman Osborn turned a new leaf at that point, everything that he has done within the movie has been for his own selfish ambition. So I think that he was ultimately thinking about his own legacy and perhaps even potentially thinking that by not telling Harry, Harry will avenge him. And we see perhaps a hint of that when Spider-Man is returning his body to Norman Osborn's house, and Norman Osborn has a big smile on his face as he's being laid down.
I didn't even notice that. That's creepy.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, and you can also see that in Alex Ross's artwork that was shown in the opening credits for Spider-Man 2.
Why was he smiling? He was dead.
I don't know. Was he dead? We know that the Goblin Serum does give him a healing factor in the comics. I don't know if that's the case for this movie, but it's something really sinister that I thought was like a nice touch.
Wow. That unsettles me. I'm like, I need to go back and watch that scene again.
It's there.
But again, going back to whether or not Norman Osborn cared for his son, we do know throughout the film, they established that Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin were like two different personas. He had like a split personality, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I say it could be both. I don't think that Norman Osborn was completely in control of his actions. I do think that he was possessed by something more sinister.
So after that scene, we are on the final scene at the funeral where Harry Osborn tells Peter Parker that he swears on his life that Spider-Man will pay for killing his father. It has a lot of dramatic irony in that moment.
And the movie just pretty much just ends, right? As far as the story goes, it ends. And of course, there's that iconic, like, Spider-Man going through the city of New York, the giant American flag in the background. And
Yeah. That scene definitely made the film end on a high note, because if you just ended it with Harry Osborn saying he's going to make Spider-Man pay and Peter Parker rejecting Mary Jane's love, if the movie just ended there, I would not have felt satisfied. But there's something so majestic about seeing Spider-Man swing through Manhattan, even though that last part is only about like 30 seconds long. It uplifts your spirits. It's just amazing to watch. And then, yeah, of course, like you said, with the American flag, it just felt very inspiring in a moment where everything just felt kind of down.
Yeah. It's so iconic, too. Mm-hmm. And I think you guys just mentioned that, right? Like, that scene was one of the most iconic moments in Marvel cinematic history. So,
yeah, for that decade, I gave it the Best Moment award.
Yeah.
I still love to watch it. Every time I watch this movie, I rewind it at least 2 or 3 times to rewatch that swinging scene, just because I love it so much.
It's just one of the most perfect Spider-Man films out there, I feel like. And I think it'll always have a nostalgic factor for being so good.
I think that this movie is not just a crown jewel of early superhero films, but of my life personally. I will always remember my first experience seeing this film. I will always really enjoy it, not only because it's a good movie, but because it meant a lot to me when it came out, and I will always appreciate it for that. If I can rip off Ready to Retro for a quick moment, Max.
Go for it.
If we could steal your rating system for this particular movie, since you are a guest on this episode. Unfortunately, we don't have Chris to explain how this works, but I will do my best. Here on Dynamic Duel Podcast, the way we rate movies, instead of saying that I give the movie 4 stars out of 5 or anything like that, instead we pick something from the movie, like if we were watching... Oh, God, how does he do this?
He just picks a random movie.
Like if we were watching Lord of the Rings right now, I would say that I give this film 4 You Shall Not Passes out of 5.
I love every moment of this right now. This is fantastic.
So in regards to this movie, I have to say that I give this film 4 I'm Spider-Mans out of 5. And Jonathan, what do you rate it?
And I will give this also, I agree, 4 From Evil out of 5.
So before I give my rating, I have to say that this movie's good because it's Nickelback. Nickelback is the soundtrack, right? And I said a hero can save us. And what's funny is I actually watched the music video. And the facial hair, I was like, what was going on in 2002? There's some nasty, like, handlebar mustache and, Nickelback. So if you like Nickelback, you'll like this movie. But, no, like, kind of my final thoughts about Spider-Man 2. I think there's cornerstone movies as far as the importance of comic book movies goes. 1989 Batman, I would definitely say this movie, Iron Man, and Avengers.
Dark Knight.
Yes, Dark Knight as well. You're right. Absolutely. So it's an important movie. With all that said, I'll be honest, I feel like it isn't aging as well as I would like it to.
Yeah.
Therefore, I will give it a 3.5 40-year-old Flash Thompson.
I love that. The movie is very of its time. It reeks of the early 2000s in some moments. So
There's Macy Gray's in it. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, freaking Macy.
that alone.
It was like, why? Why?
And Nickelback.
Look at this photograph.
All right, guys. But that does it for this review. Max, we want to thank you so much for joining us. It was a blast. Listeners, if you have not checked out Ready to Retro podcast yet, you're missing out. Go make your life better. Listen to their show. Check out the Matrix episode that I guested on, and really check out any of their episodes.
Appreciate that. You could follow us at Ready to Retro on Instagram. That's a 2. And yeah, we're on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that great stuff. And listeners of the Dynamic Dual Podcast, just want to say that, you know, not to reveal everything, but you guys, what this show is amazing. And you probably don't know all the work that goes behind the scenes, but just know that they, you know, in conversations I've had with Joe and Johnny, they do it for the fans and they want to give you the best show. So it's an honor just to be on here and to collaborate with you guys, because you guys are making the geek world so much better with what you're giving this world and your audience.
Thanks, Max.
dude.
I appreciate that.
Dude, yeah, that was really touching. Like halfway through, I just kept looking at your secret sex lips and just kidding.
You know, we'll talk later.
Jeez. All right, guys. Max, we'll talk to you later, buddy.
Yeah.
Big
totally.
fan.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Great guy, great show. If you have not checked out Ready to Retro podcast again, definitely check it out. They do have a 2 in the name of their podcast, so it's Ready #2 Retro podcast. Don't forget that if you give them a search. But let us know what you thought about the movie Spider-Man by writing to us at dynamicdualpodcast@gmail.com or visiting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find links to all of our accounts by visiting our website, dynamicdual.com.
Also, don't forget this week, if you go to dynamicdual.com, you'll find a red microphone icon in the bottom right-hand corner. Please don't forget to go ahead and click on that and leave us up to a 20-second voicemail message. We will be leaving your message in our next episode to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of the show.
Yeah, stop by, say happy anniversary or happy birthday or just whatever you want to. We'd love to hear from you guys.
Please, DC fans, come on and say how much Marvel sucks. I would love that.
And vice versa for the Marvel guys.
No, we don't need that.
In our next episode, in a tie-in to this Spider-Man episode, we will be pitting the Spider-Man villain Dr. Octopus against the Batman villain Mr. Freeze. We found a lot of similarities between these two. We think it's going to be a good matchup. We want to remind everyone again to please subscribe to our show if you haven't, or please leave a rating or review on your platform of choice. Sharing the show on social media or in person is also a big help for us.
But that does it for this episode. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson, Jace Crump, John Starosky, John Speas, Isaiah Bethune, Zachary Hepburn, and John Bechinina for helping make this podcast possible.
And stay tuned after the show when we include a trailer for the Ready to Retro podcast.
We'll talk to you guys next week. Up, up, and away.
True believers?
Chris, you really think that the remake of Power Rangers was better than Avengers Endgame?
Absolutely,
Guys?
100%.
What is
It
wrong
is
with you?
way better.
No, it's not,
It's just
dude.
way better than.
How am I
no,
even
it's not.
related
It's,
to
it's
you?
amazing. I mean, Endgame's not bad,
Guys,
but
guys.
what, Chelsea?
Chelsea?
We're running out of time for the commercial.
Wait, we're recording that right now? That's happening right now?
Yes, right now.
Oh my gosh. Well, what do the people need to know?
Well, they need to know where to find us.
Well, they can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, all the regular stuff.
And they can follow us on Instagram if they want to see, social media content.
Yeah, at Ready to Retro.
But they don't even know who we are.
Well, I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
And I'm Chelsea.
And we're Ready to Retro.
Are you?